Hi guys and welcome back. My all-time favorite DAC preamp and headphone amplifier has always been Burson Audio Conductor GT3 that I reviewed a while ago. They recently updated it to GT4 status, upgrading plenty of stuff on the inside, while making it more affordable, which is actually quite interesting. And besides the GT4, they revealed something even more interesting that I've been asking for ages now. Something that electrified every cell in my body, and of course I'm about that Fusion Core, which is a very special AC to DC power supply, which can power not only the GT4 but also every conductor, soloist and composer they released in the last 4 years or so. So we have plenty of ground to cover today, so let's hit some eardrums. Design-wise, the GT4 looks almost identical to all of their Conductor 3 series, released a few years ago. We have the same fully CNC machined cool case that works as a massive heatsink. However, since its headphone amplifier section is biased into full Class A operation, active cooling was adopted. And compared to the GT3, we no longer have a 120mm Noctua fan sitting in the middle of the case, but two much smaller ones with a slimmer profile sitting on the right and left side of the unit with much smaller openings. Even if Noctua fans are regarded as some of the most silent fans out there, you could still hear them spinning in a quiet environment, something that is no longer the case with the GT4, which is whisper quiet by comparison. On the front plate you can see also some very minor adjustments, but everything else remained intact. In the usual fashion, we have a 4-pin XLR jack, a regular 1/4-inch headphone jack and a 3.5mm microphone input. The 4 buttons let you select the input, the output. We have a settings button and then a vertical operation button. The monochrome OLED screen is easy to read and it shows all the important information. The volume wheel offers minimal physical resistance, which I like, and if you don't have the remote control nearby, you can browse through the menu with the volume wheel. On its back you'll find a USB Type-C, coaxial, optical and Bluetooth antenna socket. On the analog side there are 2 pairs of XLR and RCA inputs and a pair of analog outputs, since it can also work as a standalone preamplifier. A subwoofer output is a nice addition, and if you want to power on your entire Burson Audio lineup with just a single button, then you can spot 3 triggers that will make that happen. As for tech inside it, we're looking at a fully balanced, fully discrete Class A DAC preamp and headphone amplifier. Its digital section is based on 2 flagship level ESS 9038 DAC chips, which Burson Audio has been using for quite a few years now. And instead of paralleling 2 DAC chips as they done on the GT3 on many other units, they are now using 1 single DAC chip per channel. So we have 2 DAC chips, but one used for the left and one used for the right channel. That is resulting in a slightly lower channel crosstalk and a higher dynamic range, which is actually a very good thing. Its digital board was also upgraded, so we no longer have that old XMOS XU216, but the newest 316, which should be compatible with a wider variety of streamers, wired and wireless, so that is another improvement. Since Burson Audio really dislikes traditional op-amps, which will limit the performance of many audio devices, they have plenty of drawbacks. They started developing their own fully discrete op-amps, and right now they arrived at their 7th generation V7 op-amps. If you go with the standard package, you'll get the V6 Vivid op-amps, and if you go with higher packages, with Deluxe package for example, you are getting V7 Vivid op-amps, which are slightly better and more natural sounding at the same time. We have 8 massive transistors working in full Class A operation, which are delivering 10 watts per channel in 16 ohms if you're using that balanced output, or 5 watts in 60 ohms if you're using that regular headphone jack, which is plenty of power and should drive pretty much every headphone out there. Although we have now 6 max current power supplies versus 5 on the GT3, for a lower noise floor and for a darker background, you should consider getting a Supercharger 5A or better yet a Fusion Core. In traditional power supply designs, MOSFET transistors are used to switch the power on and off, to effectively regulate the output voltage and the current. The Fusion Core takes a very different approach by using gallium nitride transistors, which switch on and off at 1 MHz frequency, which is way above our hearing abilities. This ultra-high frequency switching, combined with a much beefier DC filtering and regulation stage, leads to a much more effective noise reduction, delivering much cleaner power to all of the components of your Burson conductor. And before you ask, I've used it as a DAC and headphone amplifier with all of my headphones and IAMs, but also with the loudspeakers that you can see behind me, working as a DAC and preamplifier. Sound-wise, I've been shouting my lungs out about the importance of clean power in your house, in your apartment, especially when it comes to hi-fi equipment. I've been using passive power conditioners for about 5 to 6 years now, and once you experience that super dark background and a complete silence in between the notes, there is simply no way going back to, unrefined sound that is raw, unpolished. There is simply no way I can go back. So this is exactly what I've heard on the Conductor GT4 powered by the Fusion Core compared to Conductor GT3 powered by that supercharger 5A. When noise is no longer part of the circuit, there are plenty of miracles that start emerging in your hi-fi system. And I know I might sound like a crazy guy or something like this, but no. I believe that all of the magic that is coming from your listening sessions is actually coming from cleanest power that you can have. I believe the soul of a hi-fi system is not residing in the equipment that you are using, but actually in how clean the power you are delivering to your electronics. And this is where you'll get that perfect timing, dark background, amazing resolution, and just a natural, unrestrained and free sound. And it's not only about resolution going up, noise floor going down, and you have these bigger void spaces in between the notes, and you can focus on basically anything without too much trouble. It's also about the timing, and I believe when everything is stopping just at the right moment, when everything is vibrating exactly as it should in real life, vocal cords, string-based instruments, air instruments, then everything starts aligning perfectly, and you're not getting just a rendition, but it's becoming lifelike sounding. And this is what I believe Fusion Core does to the GT4, and the difference is actually pretty substantial. The haziness simply went away, and the blurry images also. The sharp trebles are no longer part of the equation, just replaced with a pure, natural sound rendition that only proper, fully discrete and pure class amplifiers with zero negative feedback could achieve. I was so impressed by the sound of the GT4 driven by that Fusion Core that I immediately went to my PC and started writing a long email just thanking them for this Fusion Core, and just telling them right away that even without any kind of comparisons, I simply liked the sound of the Conductor GT4, the headphone amplifier section, more than that of the soloist Voyager, driven by that supercharger 5A. I know the soloist Voyager can be powered by the Fusion Core, and of course the sound will go even higher, but for this moment I was simply in my musical nirvana. I was actually pretty shocked by how good the GT4 sounded with the Fusion Core alone, without doing any kind of comparisons. And probably for something like 5 years now, I feel that I no longer need to talk about the frequency response, the balance in between bass, mid-range and treble, something that is simply irrelevant on the GT4 driven by the Fusion Core. It's no longer about the bass and mid-range and treble, but about the tonal balance and how everything should work together as a team. And all of that, I believe, is already perfectly balanced, and to nobody's surprise, there's zero harshness and zero listening fatigue with this unit. Now let's explore the benefits of using that Fusion Core over the supercharger 5A and then over that standard power supply. For the very first days, of course, I've used the GT4 with the Fusion Core because I wanted to know how deep is the rabbit hole and how great it can sound. But after a few days, I started my usual comparisons with that supercharger 5A and with the standard power supply. With the standard power supply, the frequency response remains intact, so you're getting basically the same bass, mid-range and treble, but everything else is going out of the window. The bass layering, the beautiful overtones, that soothing voice, amazing vocal performance, that milk with honey presentation, everything is no longer there. The sound got raw, unrefined, and the resolution went down by at least 3 notches or something like that. Swapping it with that supercharger 5A added some of that dark matter back into my music, so finally it wasn't really grayish but much darker. So of course in between the passages there was more silence. I could finally focus on the small intricacies. Resolution of course went up, and I could actually focus on so many things without stressing myself, without closing my eyes. Another change I observed is that the sound was simply more cursive, more liquid in a way, so some of that naturalness went back in, and the GT4 sounded actually considerably more natural than ever before. I could finally experience more nuances playing in the background, and the soprano voices were no longer shouting at me, but beautifully singing. The sound improved, that is for sure, but what came next was a much bigger improvement. And when I swapped that supercharger 5A with the Fusion core, let's just say that the jump from the standard power supply to the supercharger is nothing in comparison compared to what came next. With the Fusion core, the blackness is simply blacker than black. It's simply looking at a starry night. It's everything is so outlined and everything is so defined, but without becoming sharp at all. And what was already natural sounding right now is simply sweet, is simply quite smooth sounding, rounded. Everything is so weighty in a way. It's so much more natural sounding with the Fusion core. And probably the biggest change was in terms of timing and naturalness. The transients were aligning perfectly with the music, and I never felt the initial aggressive character replaced with a smoother tone and timbre, almost like adding some milk and honey on top of an already sweet sounding presentation. And all of the changes are not limited only to this Conductor GT4. So if you own anything made by Burson with a 24-volt DC input, so everything except for those Timekeepers GT, then you can use the Fusion core, which is ready to power them, and simply radically change your impressions about the sound. It's no secret to anyone that Burson Audio is trying to unlock some crazy dynamics, not only with their bigger units, but with their entry-level devices as well, like Funk, like Playmate, always delivering a little bit more oomph in the bass, more punch, more slam, while trying to control all of that. And of course, the bigger the units are getting, you are getting more power, a deeper class operation, a deeper class A bias, so of course dynamics are also going up, and the drivers will be better controlled, having a tighter grip over the drivers, be them headphones or loudspeakers. They would be shooting themselves in the foot if GT4 wouldn't be as fun and engaging, and of course it's exactly as impressive in terms of dynamics. It's lightning fast sounding with all sorts of electronica tunes. It's super fun sounding, it has lots of rumble in the bass, and of course everything is tightly controlled. But there is a difference, because when you add that Fusion core and when you remove all that clutter, all that noise, the sound is simply more fun sounding. The engagement factor, the fun factor is going through the roof. And this is that part and why I loved Burson Audio as a company and that Conductor GT3 for so many years now, because it's fun sounding, it's impactful sounding in here, and this is what I like to hear with my devices. The GT4 is quite fun sounding on its own, but the fun factor simply is reaching much higher grounds when powered by the Fusion core. And the older units get a little bit aggressive sounding in the treble with their stock power supplies, like the third generation of the Soloist 3X GT, and this is where the Fusion core comes in and simply saves the day, even for older Burson designs. Dynamics still pound and kick hard, but all of that comes forward without paying a heavy price. There aren't drawbacks anymore with the Fusion core. The aggressive nature is no longer there and the sharpness no longer stings. replaced by a richer sound than ever before. As a music-first audiophile, I always listen to music not only with my brain but also with my heart, because I need to detach myself and I need to immerse myself into the music. But this part is much more complicated than it sounds. Usually I need an old drink nearby, maybe an old friend or a bigger company, and a wackier playlist. And until everything is simply clicking into place and I can finally have some goosebumps. But besides having just the right tone and timbre and all of these requirements, I also need to hear lots and lots of information, lots of resolution coming from the tunes that I know for a lifetime. After owning hundreds of cassettes, CDs, as a teenager, I was collecting cassettes and CDs. I know my music very well, and when I cannot hear some nuances, some details, I'm usually writing back some emails and asking, hey, why you are doing your unit is not so resolving sounding, it's not so detailed, something is wrong. This time around I didn't shoot an email like this to Burson Audio. I remember listening to their GT3 2 years ago, I believe, and it was already an outstanding sounding DAC section. So the DAC section was definitely improved with that one, but the GT4 is definitely a little bit better because there are additional nuances going up. Not only with the Fusion core, but even with that standard or with that supercharger, I can still hear a little bit more. And I'm not sure if having one DAC section per channel, or maybe a newer digital board, or just a few improvements in terms of output stage, but clearly the DAC section is right now more resolving. And after playing with tens, maybe 100 DACs and owning some of the best tunes that I have heard until now, I know what is a good sounding DAC and what is a great sounding DAC. This one is still not comparing, or it's not on the same level with something like a Gustard X30 or Ferrum Wandla, but is not that far off. It's actually very close to those. So this is an outstanding DAC section right now, in my opinion. The gap is now smaller than ever before, and if you power everything with the Fusion core, then all of that info will be going up to the surface. There is simply more of everything with extra contrast and eye blink, but if you like to hear all of the things happening behind your tracks, then you should definitely invest in that Fusion core. Let's talk a little bit about the Soundstage and imaging, but first let's try to understand it from a technical perspective. I believe that channel crosstalk is the worst enemy of note separation of Soundstage, because at some point, volume-wise, the left and right channel will start to bump into each other, will start to merge into each other. Some do it early on, like at 85 dB, others are doing at 95 dB, 100 dB. But there is one type of power amplifier which do not have any channel crosstalk distortions, and those are monoblock amplifiers. That's why this is one of my biggest fetishes, having monoblock amplifiers, which I'll have very, very soon. So this channel crosstalk happens not only with amplifiers, but with DACs, with analog stages as well. So clearly you need to have a low channel crosstalk everywhere, not only with your amplifier, but starting with your DAC, starting with your streamer, so on and so forth. With a stereo setup, this channel crosstalk is slightly less important, let's say so, because what you hear with the right ear, you can hear what is emanating from your left speaker, and vice versa. With this ear, you can hear what is playing on your right speaker. But for headphones, you really don't want this channel crosstalk distortion. It's really the worst enemy, because everything is simply collapsing on your head, and you have really no separation and no soundstage, and that's why the amplifiers with the biggest channel separation are sounding really big. If you check some of my older headphone amplifier reviews where I'm comparing the Burson Soloist units with many other headphone amplifiers, you'll observe that the Soloists are usually winning in terms of resolution, in terms of transient response, always sounding fast, nimble, impactful, fun, resolving, but they are usually losing plenty of ground in terms of note separation, soundstage, because their channel crosstalk wasn't really so impressive. But right now, with the GT4 having one DAC per channel, one for your left, one for your right, and these two DAC chips are powered independently with separate power supplies. The channel crosstalk is right now simply, much smaller. The channel separation is much bigger, and therefore the sound is simply breathing a little bit nicer. So the sound is slightly bigger right now with the GT4. And of course, when you add that fusion core, which simply removes all the veil, all that graininess, all that gray background, and replaces it with a much darker background, of course, it's much easier to focus on anything really that is playing. And finally, there is a much, not much, but just a deeper sound somehow. So there is a bigger distance in between you and the music. When I moved it to the living room and when it replaced a much more expensive Rockna Wave Dream Signature, I immediately observed that the sound is no longer coming from behind the wall, from behind the TV, but in front of the TV, so in front of the audio rack. So clearly it wasn't as deep sounding, but very important, the sounds were not emanating from the speakers, but from the center of the audio rack. So clearly the note separation is good. This is clearly a thing, and imaging was also quite sharp, so again I could focus on things happening and flying in the air pretty easily. The notes were crystal clear and defined, and the sounds were still emanating from the middle of the audio rack. And overall, I like the new approach that Burson Audio adopted with the GT4, expanding the soundscape, stretching the sound a little wider, and simply delivering a bigger picture at the end of the day. Let's briefly talk about the noise floor with IAMS and about its driving power with the many headphones. And right off the bat, I connected some of my noise sniffers. Right now I'm using FiO FH19 and also FiO FA19, which are very sensitive to noise coming from the source. And right from the start, even on low gain, there is a little bit of hiss playing in the background. Regardless of the volume, it's always there. On high gain, it's slightly more powerful, that noise. So overall, I'd say that you are not buying a 10-watt headphone amplifier to drive some teeny, tiny, small IAMs. I would not do that with the Conductor GT4. Although the noise floor is lower, there is a little bit of hiss, a little bit of noise coming from the amp stage, and you simply cannot stop it with ultra-sensitive IAMs. With some of my sensitive desktop headphones like Apus Caspian, I cannot detect that tiny hiss anymore. It's not there, and I presume that with Grados, with vocals, you'll experience basically the same sound, so it will be crystal clear without any kind of hisses. So yeah, you can use desktop headphones, no problem, but ultra-sensitive IAMs, I would not do that. In terms of output power, if you checked my Conductor GT3, if you checked my Soloist GT reviews, then it's really no different. It's pretty much the same. It's biased into the same class A operation. So simply put, it can drive pretty much every headphone from my collection. Yes, including the HiFiMan Susvara. Yes, including that T+A Solitaire P, and also the high impedance Sennheiser HD800S. There is plenty of headroom. The smallest headroom, of course, I had with HiFiMan Susvara, I believe. The highest volume I could reach, absolutely highest for a few seconds, was 70 out of 100 steps available. So clearly I had enough steps for some wild dynamic swings. With T+A, that was something like 55. With HD800S, the same. So clearly plenty of power always remains on top. What's more important though is that all of these headphones, including the Susvara, T+A Solitaire and HD800S, were thumpy, were jumpy, were quite dynamic sounding, impactful down low with the bass. The treble never bothersome in long listening sessions, even with Susvara, Solitaire P and HD800S, absolutely natural and very easygoing in the treble sounding. So yeah, it was reaching some Speedy Gonzalez levels of speed, it was lightning fast, it was reaching some Mjolnir levels of impact in the bass. It was always tight with these headphones, especially with planars, very important. So it was never sounding out of place, on the contrary, always tight, nimble, impactful and fun. And this is all I need to have from a very good headphone amplifier. Wrapping up, I really wanted to compare it with lots of all-in-one devices and do a more complete review and comparison and so on, but everything that I've tried in the past year, in this year, like Topping DX9, like FiO K19, like Hi-Fi and Serenade, they simply cannot compete with the GT4 in the standard package. It's simply better sounding on all accounts, and more importantly, it's more dynamic, it's more engaging sounding, it's more fun sounding, and this part for me personally is actually very important. So this time around, it was not tuned for snobby audiophiles, but for music-first audiophiles. It's much more universal sounding right now. So you can listen to classical jazz, old tunes, new electronica, rock tunes. It's really very universal sounding with all of that. If you are headphone geek or stereo head, I'm both. It's also very universal because you can use it as a DAC and preamp in your stereo, as a DAC and headphone amplifier in your Hi-Fi battle station. The only negative I can say about this one is that it didn't work with ultra-sensitive IMs. This is my only gripe. Everything else was improved on the GT4. The volume was improved. There is a much smaller difference between low gain and high gain, so you will not blast your eardrums. Definitely lots of improvements on the GT4 compared to its predecessor, so yeah, Gold Award was fully justified. Before you go, if you'd like to know a lot more about it and about the Fusion Core, then I recommend checking out my written review that I left below, which contains on average about 4 times the information of this video. And as usual, be positive, keep your chin up. My name is Sando, and I'll see you very soon.